Well, good evening, everyone. And make sure we did go live there. Good to see everybody back here on a Wednesday night that's not too terribly cold. That's one of the wonderful things about it. Of course, we're back in 2 Corinthians. We're moving right along in it. We're in chapter 8 tonight. Paul's, as we've talked about, just a quick recap, this is Paul addressing some of the resistance that he received from his first letter to the Corinthians. Titus had gone there and came back and told him what was going on, so Paul needed to address some of that. You know, some of the people there did respond appropriately. Some of them did not respond appropriately. Some of them were like, well, who are you? And some of them weren't repenting. Some of them were questioning his authority or apostleship. Of course, we know that there were other people that came in behind him that were teaching incorrect. Judaizing teachers or false teachers in general. Also, some of them, look at me, you got to pay to hear me. And Paul was not that way. Sorry about that. They were stirring the people up, if you will, and causing. One thing they were doing, some of them were mixing Old Testament and New Testament stuff, which we even see today. There's people today that say, "Oh, you have to give 10%." Well, that's not the case. That's Old Testament. There's people today that think you can't eat pork. Well, that's right. That's Old Testament, First Covenant. But Paul has been addressing forgiveness, first of all, then talking about the spiritual versus the physical world, and warning, look, we're going to be judged. There's going to be a resurrection. Period. He warns them about idolatry. We're going to be judged. There is going to be a resurrection. You better get rid of that idolatry. And he talked about being unequally yoked, and we talked a little bit about how that can be misused as far as definition of it. And one of the things I did say, is it sinful to marry someone that is not a Christian? It's not necessarily sinful. Is it a good idea? Your spouse is either going to help you get to heaven or help you not go to heaven. And you've got to make that choice. The main points from the first part of all this was that, Paul was dealing with the flashy teachers, the false teachers. And he pointed out, look at what Christ did. Look how Christ suffered. I've suffered as well. And just wrapping it up, Paul's like, what is wrong with y'all? I mean, really, what is wrong with y'all? Y'all know better than this, in essence. Now, we're picking up a different section today. Chapter 8 and chapter 9. He's talking more about giving. And Paul collected funds. Paul had already collected funds from Asia Minor for the church in Jerusalem. That was they were being persecuted. It was not a good time. There was a drought. And in this section, verses 8 and 9, he urges the Corinthians to continue their preparations. They had already started, taking up a collection, and he wants them to finish strong, if you will, and welcome Titus and the two other traveling companions who will assist them in collecting the funds. So as we move on, I had back in the outline, this is a whole different section in the outline there. And in the first part here, I want you to read, when we read this, pay note of the contradictions that Paul uses to explain the churches there. It's interesting the way Paul does this. He talks about them in contradictions to really show what's going on. But I'm going to start out by reading 1 through 7 here to begin with. And it starts out, and as I take a quick sip here. It starts out in verse 1. Moreover, brethren, we make known to you the grace of God bestowed on the churches of Macedonia, that in a great trial of affliction, here's the contradictions here, that in a great trial of afflictions, the abundance of their joy and the deep poverty abounded in the riches of their for I bear witness that according to their ability, yes, and beyond their ability, they were freely willing, imploring us with much urgency that we would receive the gift and the fellowship of the ministering to the saints. In verse 5 he goes on and says, and not only as we had hoped, but they first gave themselves to the Lord, and then to us by the will of God. So we urged Titus that as he had begun, so he would also complete this grace in you as well. But as you abound in everything, now this he's addressing, of course, he's talking about them in Corinth. But as you abound in everything, he's saying, you guys abound in this, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in all diligence, and in your love for us, see that you also abound in this grace also. The grace being giving, technically, but it's giving, but it's helping others. So, if we want to stop and look back, notice the contradictions. A curiosity question. Are you a contradiction to people? I mean, a legitimate question. Think about that, if you will, for a minute. Are you a contradiction in a good way to people, and hopefully not in a bad way? We can be a contradiction, people saying, us telling people we're Christians and then not acting that way. But the churches there in Macedonia weren't all that. They gave more than people would have thought they would. It's almost like the widow's mite. Think about it. People wouldn't think she'd go and give that, but she did. And she could have been considered a contradiction in some ways. I kind of wear my emotions on my sleeve, those saying sometimes. A lot of times I often react. There are times I try not to, but there are times I react too much to my surroundings, or let people see my reactions to my surroundings. And how are you? Are you aware of that about yourself, if you are that way? Or another way, how do we come across to others? I mean, that's an important thing for us to do. The churches here, I think my microphone might have died. Is that? Okay, sorry. Either way, we need to be aware of those things. And we have, first of all, when we back up, we see where they had given themselves to the Lord. That's really one of the first steps in all of this, isn't it? When we give ourselves to the Lord, hopefully we start looking beyond ourselves, if we can, being a little less, in some ways, you could say, a little less self-centered, if you will. When we have Christ in us, if we're being self-centered, hopefully we're seeing Christ and working in Christ. And, Paul references some of this stuff back as we get to this too. He's don't forget how much Jesus has done for us and given to us. I had mentioned this on Sunday when I was talking about the I am the light of the world. I mentioned, Christians, little Christians, or Christ-like. God was sacrificial for others. So that's something that Paul is pointing out to them. But Paul is also pointing out exactly how blessed they were in comparison to the churches in Macedonia. Paul says, see to it that you not only, y'all do well. That's what Paul's saying here. Y'all abound in knowledge, in faith, in diligence, and speech. And he's saying to them also now, remember how God was. Look what these other churches did. Also abound in giving. See, but you notice he also points out when he's talking back about them, he points out that the churches of Macedonia were also, in a right relationship with God and understanding what God had done for them, and that made them more generous, if you will. It's to their benefit, is what Paul is pointing out to them. And we see Paul here in verse 8. He says, I speak not by commandment. He's not saying you have to do this. He says, but I am testing your sincerity of your love by the diligence of others. For you know the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ. I love the way he points this out, but it's so true though. He says, that though he was rich, yet for your sake, and technically all of our sakes, everyone's sakes, he became poor. That you through his poverty might become rich. Because of what Jesus did, coming here humbly, giving of himself sacrificially, we actually become rich. And I'm not talking about monetary value. Y'all know that. And Paul wasn't trying to beat them down. He wasn't commanding them to do this, but he was trying to bring the best out of them. And sometimes there are people, there are televangelists, and there are other people that, I'm not saying here, by the way, but I can think of all these different quote-unquote famous preachers that are big about, you got to give this, and they come up with all this crazy stuff. And I mean, some of them, you watch them and go like, how can anybody believe this? Trying to get you to just send money to them because that's what they want. And they're not trying to bring out the best in them. They're trying to get monetary value from them. Jesus wasn't doing that either. Paul's not doing that either. I remember growing up as a kid, and I guarantee you y'all have heard it. You've had people, God will bless you. I'm not going to say if you put X amount in the offering plate that you're going to get X amount back, but I do believe through faithfulness and through giving is one part of that faithfulness. And if we are faithful to God, we will be blessed. Things happen. They do. Paul was kind of saying, what Jesus did? Follow his example there in verse 9. He says, for you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor. Of course, saying from heaven coming to earth. And that through his poverty you might become rich. And he goes on there in verse 10 and says, and in this I give advice. It is for your advantage not only to be doing what you begun and were desiring to do a year ago. So we know they had desired to take up this collection at one time and had started to do it. And of course now these other guys came in. Of course they're probably wanting to get their hands in that cash supply they've got. goes on in verse 11, says, but now you also must complete the doing of it, that as there was a readiness to desire it, so there also may be a completion of what you have begun. For if there is first a willing mind, it is accepted according to what one has, and not according to what he does not have. In essence, if we think about this, Paul's saying, look, y'all started this. Y'all wanted to do it. And quite frankly, they did that when they were in a better position with Christ. And now they've gotten to the point where Paul has to write them again to start correcting the ship again. He said, look, y'all are willing to do this. You were in a right place and a right mind to do this. Oh, by the way, the Macedonian church is in a good place, and look what they did. As an example, don't forget what God did for you. Paul, in a lot of ways, is, saying good intentions don't cut it. Just because you wanted to do it and you started it, and now if you don't complete it, don't go, well, I meant to do it. Well, that's a lesson for a lot of people nowadays, isn't it? Good intentions do not lead to glory. Think about that, if you will. I planned on repenting. I believed in Jesus, and I planned on giving up the stuff I knew I needed to give up, but I never got around to it. I just kept on doing what I've been doing the whole time. But I meant to, Jesus. How do you think that'll go over? Jesus, I knew I needed to be baptized, but, I just didn't want my hair to get messed up. That's important to some of us now, I'm going to tell you. But there are people that put off things for stupid reasons. I mean, my hair always looks good, let's be honest. But do you know people like that? Do you know people that, I'll get around to it. Yeah, I know I need to be baptized out. Yeah, I know I'm supposed to be a changed person. I know I'm supposed to live a different life, but yet I haven't, and I'm not. They have good intentions. They have great good intentions. I'd love to know what Signal's getting involved with these lights, but they could at least do it better with points I'm making. But, good intentions aren't going to get us anywhere in life or to heaven, if we think about it. You realize there's people that preach good intentions. Think about it. All you got to do is believe. They only preach like a quarter of it, or a third, or a tenth of what you're supposed to do, because they don't want to tell them all the stuff they're supposed to do, because then they might not want to do it. Then they might not keep coming. Then they might not give some money. Then they won't have as many people sitting in the seats. So they preach falsehoods, good intentions. They want to make it easy instead of following the instructions. I have to laugh. I think it's a paper towel commercial on TV right now where they're going, this looks like a newlywed couple sitting there. They just put a table together, probably from IKEA or something, who knows. And, it looks great. And he puts his drink down on it, and it's on top of this white, fluffy carpet. And the wife goes, what are all these leftover parts? And all of a sudden the thing goes, and all the drink starts spilling, But that's kind of, what are we building? Are we building our future on God's instructions? And are going to be solid and secure? Or are we building on just looking at the picture on the box and not being foundational and not getting it right and it not lasting. You know, there's a lot of people on both ways. Paul says it is accepted according to what one has and not according to what he does not have. Basically, what is he saying there? Think about that. It's accepted according to what you have and not according to what he does not have. Think about that for a second. What is he saying? He's saying, look, give according to what you have. You don't have to go and get a loan to give X amount of money and all this stuff. It's like the widow's mite there, if you will. She gave from what she had. She had little, so she gave little in comparison to other people that maybe had a lot and should have given a lot but gave only a little. This is not a call to socialism, believe it or not. But you know, there's a lot of people that think, oh yeah, communism comes from the Bible or socialism comes from the Bible. Hey, everybody's supposed to be equal. You're supposed to share everything. Well, it also says if you don't work, you don't eat. That's another case in point where people take things out of context and twist things around to say what they want them to say. Basically, give appropriately from how you've been blessed, as we've been taught all along. We go on in verse 13, and it says, "For I do not mean that others should be eased and you burdened." That right there, you can say, yeah, that definitely ain't communism or socialism. "But by an equality, that now at this time your abundance may supply their lack, that their abundance also may supply your lack, that there may be equality. As it is written, he who gathered much had nothing left over, and he who gathered little had no lack." Of course, that's from Exodus chapter 16, dealing with manna, when they were collecting manna. And so he goes again in verse 16, says, "But thanks be to God who puts the same earnest care for you into the heart of Titus." They say, I'm so thankful for Titus that he's still on fire for this and for you, and that, hey, he loves you just like I do. Verse 17, it goes, "For he not only accepted the exhortation, but being more diligent, he went to you of his own accord." In other words, I didn't have to tell Titus to do this. He did it because he wanted to, because he loves you. "And we have sent with him the brother whose praise is in the gospel throughout all the churches." You notice there's not a name there. A lot of people like to know individual details. That's fine. Some people say it's Luke. It could be. It may not be. Just for what it's worth, in case you were going, wonder who that was. 19, it says, "And not only that, but who was also chosen by the churches to travel with us with this gift, which is administered by us to the glory of the Lord himself, and to show your ready mind. Avoiding this, that anyone should blame us in this lavish gift which is administered by us, providing honorable things, not only in the sight of the Lord, but also in the sight of men." Who has ever heard of someone misusing church funds? Yeah, it happens, doesn't it? It sure does. Y'all know I read a thing, I get a daily email from a place called Ministry Watch. They cover all the news that's going on, and that deals with any type of church and organization and stuff. And it's constant. It's constant. Embezzled this, embezzled that, was supposed to use it for this and used it for that. Of course, now you're being reported on every day of all churches all over the world. But I read it every day as a constant reminder to myself, buddy, you do the right thing. You do the right thing. Do not, and here's Paul going, we're bringing this gift, but we're going to avoid this. We're going to avoid anybody having anything to blame us for in the ministration of this. And we're going to prove we're honorable in it. Not only in the sight of the Lord, but also in the sight of men. That's verse 20 and 21 there. Basically, Paul and Titus were acting in a fiduciary manner there. In other words, they were just taking care of the money until it was put where it was supposed to be. And he was saying, we ain't going to let anybody be able to say anything about us, because it can happen. And y'all know it as well. Then it goes on in 22 here it says, and we have sent with them our brother, whom we have often provided diligent, who has often proved diligent in many things, but now much more diligent because of the great confidence which we have in you. If anyone inquires about Titus, he is my partner and fellow worker concerning you. Or if our brethren are inquired about, they are messengers of the churches, the glory of Christ. So we have another unnamed brother here. They're not specific that says this person or that person. Really doesn't matter who it was. What we know about them is they were proved diligent in many things and trustworthy. And they were messengers of the churches. 24, therefore show to them and before the churches the proof of your love and of our boasting on your behalf. Okay, what is this kind of saying? What is this kind of saying there? Therefore show to them the proof of your love. How do we show proof of being a Christian? By the fruit we bear, right? How do we prove we love Jesus? By what we do. In essence, that's what he's saying. Prove your love by your actions. We need to remember that too. We need to prove our love by our actions. Notice I didn't say, prove your love by putting more money in the collection plate. Actions. Not one. We can't give enough money to get to heaven. It doesn't work that way. But money is needed. Paul's addressing this. And there we go. Now, we've got a minute left, or we're not going to jump into chapter 9. So, in essence, Paul is saying, look, y'all started to help the church in Jerusalem. They need your help. Y'all do great in all these different areas. Do great in this area as well, is what he's saying. He said, we've got guys that are proven, coming to help you collect the funds and just take them on. They're good guys. And we're going to make sure that no one can say anything, can cast no shadow upon us that we did anything wrong, and we're going to make sure of that. In essence, saying, you can trust us. The essence of chapter 8. Thank you, everyone, for being with us tonight. We sure love you. We sure hope you have a good night. If we can help with anything, you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you and have a good evening.